How you guys doing?
Woo!
All right, all right.
I think they're really excited to see me, Jeremy.
Yes, they
actually,
are.
Clearly. So Jeremy stars in this lovely, lovely, lovely British series, Mr. Selfridge, and it's in its fourth final season. And what struck me so much about especially this season, Jeremy, and tell me if you disagree, is that it's a period drama that deals with so many issues that are relevant today, like work-life balance. Should women marry and have children, or should they focus on their careers? Like that storyline especially. You know, how driven should someone be? What do you do after a divorce? So is that something that really resonates with you?
Yeah, definitely. That definitely resonates with me. Especially, it was interesting being over there for the past 4 years, and doing a show that that I love, and was lucky enough to play this character and starring and producing an hour drama. And it takes a lot of work and ambition to do that and to pull that off. And it definitely addressed those issues within myself in terms of, you need balance in this life to be happy. And so I was over there in London navigating through all this, and couldn't be more proud of the show. But some of the themes that we were dealing with was all of that, and also dealing with racism. And
Of course, the machinist that gets hired.
yes, and also Jimmy Dillon's Indian. And it's so funny to me because I grew up just outside of Chicago, in a truly integrated school. And so I didn't really know that racism existed because I was living in this microcosm where, I was one of the only white faces that played football, and so I grew up on the stage, and so I thought, and our homecoming kings were never white, you know what I mean? And so once I left high school, I realized, oh, wait a minute, they're anti-Semitic, and I'm Jewish, and they don't like me.
How can that be?
Like, what's happening? And wait, doesn't everyone grow up in the theater? So it was kind of a rude awakening. And Harry Selfridge was one of these guys who was very colorblind and hired people because of how passionate they were about their jobs and were they worthy of the job. That's it. Had nothing to do with anything else. And he was also way ahead of his time. He was a guy who, before television was in people's homes, you could go into his store and be on television. And literally, they would have cameras there, and you could be a part of the interactive experience in that way. He was way ahead of his time in so many different ways. And here we are 100 years later, and it was voted the best store in the world. So he was doing something right.
This season, what do you make of his trajectory? Because he has some pretty dramatic ups and downs, I think.
It's 10 years on, and you can see Harry's older, and unfortunately not wiser, which I think makes it all that much more fascinating. He's making more mistakes than ever, but it's mostly based on the fact that you get to see his journey. He learned that the hard way how much his wife and family meant to him when one of the original problems they brought to me was, how do you create a character that we will love, yet the character cheats on his wife? How do we not then separate ourselves from this character? So I really love playing these characters that live in these dualities. Ari Gold was a character who was by some people's standards, a pig and an abrasive guy. How do we still love him? Well,
He was actually a decent husband.
he was a decent husband.
He loved his
And
family.
he was monogamous, and yet you thought he wanted to be with every woman that walked past him. So there's that great duality. And with Harry Selfridge, during the day, he was this incredible businessman who cared so much about his work and believed in the empowerment of women, and was such an evolved human being, and that at night he wanted to gamble and fell for the Jenny Dolly and of the Dolly sisters, and spent hundreds of millions of pounds, which would be $800 million today, that he basically gave them to gamble with and lost, and it was part of the beginning of the end of Harry Selfridge. So he those dualities where during the day he was a hardworking gentleman, and at night he kind of went off the reservation, if
Yeah.
you will. Yeah.
And this season too, I mean, we see him age, we see him become more frail health-wise. What went through your mind when you were shooting those scenes?
It's really the whole experience was very humbling because the actors over there are incredibly overqualified for all of their roles, and you've got people that it was very apparent to me. It was very interesting. We would have like a day player, and they would have one line, and I would think, God, they're good, they're so good, and then they would end up being the lead in Star Wars. Isn't that the girl that had a cameo like on our show? Like literally things like that would happen. And you get the sense of like that we're all in it together. And our cultures are very similar and yet very different. I think over here, when you tell your parents, I want to be an actor, they say, you can do anything you put your heart to. And over there they say, you're most likely not going to make it. But if you go to drama school and you go through all the rites of passage and you work your butt off, you might have a shot, but it's probably not going to happen. So they do tough love, where we're more about the American dream. And I think it's somewhere in the middle. So over there working and having some of the best people in the world in every department, especially hair and makeup, that made me look a lot older. I kind of, as I age, I learned, because at one point I have to get many, many years older, and the director asked me, was I trying to look like Don Corleone from The Godfather? I was like, no, I'm not trying to. I guess I just somehow do.
That's in your future, apparently.
I mean, it could be worse. There are worse people to look like
than Marlon Brando. That is very true.
Yeah, than Marlon Brando. And I think I look more just like a Shar-Pei because I just become just a wrinkled mess. But yeah, I did kind of resemble an aging Don Corleone, which was really fun.
And I know this has been such a passion project for you. We talked about it last year, and you love this character so much. What are you going to miss the most about him?
I'm gonna miss. There's so much. He was a guy who just absolutely loved what he did, and he was tireless, and he was such a brilliantly flawed, colorful character. But the way they did it, they approached me and they said, listen, we want to do 4 seasons, and here's what it's going to look like. And they stuck to it. Over here, you do a pilot, and it's very rare when they will have mapped the entire trajectory of the season, of the series out. It's very rare. And so I knew what I was getting into, and there was a real feeling of pride when we were done with it, as opposed to the feeling of loss because we can't continue on. And over there, it's just a different setup. They don't have as much money as we do. There's not like a whole incentive of syndication, all this stuff. Here, they're trying to get to a certain number of episodes. And we did our thing. We did it to the best of our ability, and now we're moving on.
Do you feel? I mean, and you grew up the son of you grew up in a theater family. Your sister's a filmmaker. Do you feel as much love and passion for your career as Harry did for his?
I do. I don't think of it as work. It's just something that I love to do, and that's what they say. I guess that's one of the quotes about success, is that if you can find something to do that isn't work, that you love to do every day, then that's success in itself. And I really do believe that. And he loved to do what he did. And I think one of the things that helped me play the character was that he kind of fancied himself an artist, and retail was his theater. And you can see that he was the guy that, like, when any of you go to a department store and you walk in and you see like all these products when you first walk in, hair and makeup and all that kind of stuff, that was his idea, and he took that from the French. The big windows that you see, that was his idea. The customer's always right, that was his credo. 200 days till Christmas, that was his idea, to count it all out. Bargain basement sales, all these things were like, It's what he created when he was at Marshall Fields in Chicago and took all those ideas over to London with him.
And I guess what aspect of the character resonates the most with you when you look back on him?
What's interesting is that when you're being interviewed, you guys,
Yes.
what the interviewer will ultimately always do is try to figure out what aspects of yourself are like the character that you play.
That is actually very
Because
true.
the reality is they built a narrative that I was Ari Gold and that I was this terrible person. And there's a not you.
No.
By the way, you're amazing.
Thank you.
No, you are.
No, actually, thank you. Because when I met you last year, I was like,
No.
you're nothing
No,
like him. I can't
no,
believe
you're
people
you're
write.
amazing, not you. But
All the stories
there-
that open with
there is a
Jeremy
cut-
Piven walks in with none of the attitude of Ari Gold.
absolutely.
That's-
And there are people that they do try to tie you to your character, and there's a big compliment there because what you're trying to do is inhabit the character as fully as possible and not judge your character. And no one's the devil in their own story. Even if you're playing the devil, you have to put all your opinions aside and not judge your character and give them as much integrity as you possibly can and love them. And if the result of that is that people tie you to that character or think that you are that character or share the same ideology as that character, that comes with the territory. And I wasn't even prepared for that. I didn't know that if you were in people's living rooms for almost a decade, they would think that you're that character. And it came as a very big surprise.
Because you're actually nothing like him whatsoever.
Well,
Ari Gold, I mean.
Well, yeah, and what's funny is people who have met me and they go literally, who's this? Who's this guy? What's happening here? What can you drop this? Drop what?
Well,
the
like
nice guy stuff. Are you stoned? No, this is who I am. This is who you are. Well, who's that guy then? Well, that's a character. That's a fictional character, and actually, it was based on a real guy. Ari Emanuel is Mark Wahlberg's agent. There was an E, a turtle, a drama, all these people. There was a Harry Selfridge, and my God, did he create a legacy? And I couldn't be more proud of this show. The irony is, and I was told not to say this, but the irony is that Harry Selfridge built his empire partly through advertising. He was the first guy to take out full-page ads in the Daily Mail, and he was like a man-made celebrity. He put his face and his name, his likeness out there, and he was there every morning at 9 a.m. when the doors open. You could meet the great Harry Selfridge. And the irony is, here we are, a show that's been sold to 165 countries. We're a very big hit overseas, and then yet in my own backyard, we're kind of going under the radar. And the variable is that PBS, the great PBS, doesn't have the funds to advertise. They just don't. They can't cut through the noise because they're funded by the people. And I just think that it's so interesting and ironic that Harry's an American, I'm an American. In my own backyard, we're kind of struggling to get that audience, and yet it's the best show I've ever done. I couldn't be more proud of it. And it's an interesting journey. All of these things happen to us for a reason. And you can kind of rail against the world and play the victim, but that's not the way life is.
Well,
it's your job to navigate it, and that's why I'm here, and that's why I blow people up on my Twitter and Instagram and Facebook to the point where they want me to stop. You have to be a one-man band because there's no money to go out there. There are no ads, there are no billboards, there's nothing. And it's been a really interesting experiment. How long does it take a show to catch on simply by word of mouth? And the answer is 200 years.
200 years. That's
Yes.
your mathematical analysis?
Yes, I figured it
Okay.
out. Yes.
And it's such a shame because the show is a gem, and especially you think, okay, period drama, snooze, but it's so relatable to everything that's happening today. Like in season 4, Harry opens a technology department, which what store can you go into today without a technology department? He has the Dolly sisters, who are basically today's version of reality TV stars, right? Show up and do like a trunk show kind of thing. Which happens every day in stores, but he was the first one to do it.
The Dolly sisters make the Kardashians look like the Pope, basically. I mean, they walk in with their furs,
Drinking
early
champagne.
in the morning, just on their 11th glass of champagne. and they're just on this endless victory lap, and they're just enjoying and loving their lives without any apologies. And Harry finds them so refreshing. And he's a guy who's getting older, and they make him feel young, and everyone around him just can see it happening, and he can't see it himself. And so it ends up being tragic, but you can't get ahead of yourself. You have to be as present as you can when you play.
I was actually going to ask you, what do you think he saw in them? Because you see them now, and you're like, ugh, But
I think he saw a part of himself, and the reality is we all get old, and he had a very, very youthful spirit, and just him being around them made him feel young. He loved to gamble. They loved to gamble. They had they shared all the same loves. They were just
that's a great love
of
to have.
completely different generations, and he was blinded by the fact that he was their bank. He just gave them hundreds of millions of dollars to gamble, and bless his heart. But man, it just makes for really fun television.
Good TV, yeah. And you grew up, obviously, as we said, in a family of actors. What was the moment that you decided that you wanted to act? Did you have this revelation, or did it just kind of happen?
Well, I mean, I was always on the stage, and I didn't realize how lucky I was. We were doing improv and scene study, and doing, like, when I was a kid, just performing like Salinger and Chekhov, and butchering all of it and having fun. And I was also playing football at the time, and was very successful as a football player early on. And they just, by the time I was a running back, by the time I got to high school, they didn't allow white boys in the backfield. It just wasn't, so they put me on the line. I was like a 5'9", 175-pound offensive guard, and the reality is they're 6'4", 270.
Yeah.
And so,
your football career was curtailed.
yeah, I
Safe to
didn't go
say.
beyond high school. And so I kind of always, dreamt of being a football player, but there aren't any undersized linebackers. I mean, the most undersized linebacker you get out there is Von Miller, who's probably 6'2", 240, who runs about a 4.3 40 and caught Cam Newton by surprise.
Well, I think you're doing okay, though. I think
I'm
your
doing
your second career choice worked out
Yeah,
fine.
the fallback thing was acting, and it's safer, definitely safer, less head trauma.
Unless you read what's unless.
But I do, but it is, I'm very lucky. It's interesting because most actors are frustrated athletes.
Really?
Yeah, 1,000%. But it also helps because you also have that discipline of organized sports, and also knowing what it's like to fail. Failure is so healthy, I can't even tell you. It'll just fuel you because you just know what it feels like, and you don't want to go back there again.
So you do whatever you can to avoid it, obviously.
Yeah, it does help stoke the fires and give you some clarity of intent.
Well, what do you want to do next? Now that
I'd like to sleep.
really? Yeah, that's not going to happen.
No. I am doing something. I wish I could tell you about it, but I'm working on something with my sister, who is
That's amazing.
Yeah, who at this moment is directing an episode of Transparent, and her husband is Adam McKay, who wrote and directed The Big Short. And she and I are going to do something together that I can't tell you about. Not because I'm trying to hide anything. I just once it becomes real, I don't want to jinx it. That's the only reason.
So what's it like working with your sister?
Well, it's really great because we're on shorthand with everything because we grew up in the work together, and I've been directed by my parents my whole life, and so she's kind of brilliant in what she does, and whatever she says has weight, and I know she's not being frivolous, and working with family is the best. I think there's some people that think, God, how can you do it? I don't know any other way, so to me, it's just second nature.
It's a given.
Yeah, it's nice, and it literally feels like home, so it's nice.
And before we turn this over to the audience, what's the number one thing you're going to miss about your British set?
Number one thing about my British set, well, over there, they have less money. and they have to be more creative. And so everyone is just working on the top of their game. And you look at this series, and I've talked to a couple people who are heads of American productions and American studios, and they can't believe
The production values, right?
production values and how much money it costs. And this is done for a real cost. This costs about literally 1/5 the price of Entourage, and yet it's twice as long. It's an hour, and it looks like a big lush film. So they just have to be so inventive, and the actors are so overprepared, and yet they're not pretentious. They're just fun-loving people who are ready to go and ready to play, and it was a dream come true for me.
I remember some of the British theater actors I've interviewed in the past were like, "Oh, I'll drive myself to the interview. I'll do my own hair and makeup." Can you ever imagine anyone here doing that?
Yeah, they just, but it's interesting. They do say that, but in television in the States, you do have to drive yourself, and television over there, they drive you no matter what.
Really?
You always have a driver, which I think probably, I'm guessing, came about probably in the 60s when they couldn't find Peter O'Toole, and he was just like, naked on some pub, and they just.
They were like, "This will never happen
Yeah, called
again."
like the cock and the bull. Let's just pull Peter out of there for the love of God. And they're probably something like that happened, and they said, actors are eccentric people, and we need to drive them to work every day.
And make sure they show up on time.
Yes.
Yes. And now we'll turn it over to the audience.
Hey, Jeremy. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Of all the movies that you played in, which one would you say had the sequel or a continuation? Throughout your career, which movie would you like to see as a sequel?
That's an excellent question, and I've done a lot. I've done like 70 movies, which is crazy. I think I'd done 40 before I started Entourage, which just means that I'm old. That's all that means. It's funny. I was flipping through the channels, and Smokin' Aces came on. I think it's one of those movies where you look at that and go, "My God, look at that cast!" And I think it's just before everyone blew up, that movie. So I think that's one of those movies that has become kind of a nice cult kind of hit. And I love playing Buddy Israel, and I would love to investigate that again. The great Joe Carnahan, who you all know from various movies, and also helped create and direct The Blacklist, and is one of those guys that just creates the best atmosphere you could ever imagine to work in. It's just a pleasure to mix it up with that guy. So I think it would be Smokin' Aces 2.
Joe
That would be amazing.
Carnahan,
Joe.
you watching?
I mean, the thing about Joe is literally he's like Jamaican. He like has 116 jobs at the same time, and he just grinds and just does a brilliant job at every one of them.
Hey, Jeremy, good afternoon. You're one of
Hello.
my acting heroes, and it's
Thank
great
you.
to have you here.
Thank you.
Speaking strictly from a character point of view, who would you consider more successful, Harry Selfridge or Ari Gold, and why?
That's an interesting, great question. Who would be more successful, Harry Selfridge or Ari Gold? The real Ari Gold, if you remember, at the end of the Entourage movie, was fired and out of work. And I can't tell you what happens to the real Harry Selfridge, but I have a feeling that Ari Gold would always land on his feet. He is a cat. He will always land on his feet and figure out a way. The character that Ari Gold is based on, Ari Emanuel, is the same way. He's a guy who just keeps evolving as a businessman. Harry Selfridge, Selfridges was voted the best store in the world last year. So here we are 100 years after its inception, and it's still going strong. So I think it's a toss-up, but I think that ultimately Ari Gold would probably be more successful because he's probably more ambitious and more tenacious. But Harry Selfridge, I won't get ahead of myself and tell you what happens at the end of the series, but it's more dramatic than anything we did on Entourage, and it's one of these heartbreaking moments where it's, God, is it a lesson learned? And you won't believe it's true what happens to him, and
It's
every
true.
every bit of it's true. I remember reading about it and thinking, this is just going to make for great television. Bless his soul, but
Then you're like, it really. And plus, it's also how do you define success? Do you define it professionally or personally? And in that sense, I think Ari, I mean, on a personal level, certainly had it figured out more than Harry.
I think on a personal level, he's much more successful because he convinced Mrs. Ari to get back with him. So
Hey Jeremy, how are you?
good, thank you.
I actually just finished watching Entourage for like the second time a few weeks ago. It's one of my favorite shows. Even I love the movie, one of my favorite movies. I read somewhere a while back that you guys were like there might be a second Entourage movie. I was wondering if that's true or not.
You know, and I'm not just making this up. I feel I am always the last to know, and I'm not just saying that. Like, and I just love it. I've embraced that. So, if there is, no one told me. You know, Doug Ellen, the creator of Entourage, said something, and it actually has a lot of weight. He said, a lot of people are going to end up seeing this movie one way or another. And I think he's right. I think it's one of those movies that the theatrical release was just the kind of the first step. And it just feels like it's through all these different ways now. There's, you know, people have seen it on airplanes or on demand and iTunes and all these different ways. And I just think it's made its way to everyone. And I think it's a really fun, satisfying movie. And it's funny because the some people in the British press really laid into it, and I don't know why exactly, because I don't know what movie they thought it was going to be, because it's a movie that's very true to the series.
Show, yeah. I mean,
you know, it's an extension, exploring and heightening what that series was, and I think in that way, I think a lot of people are very satisfied by it. So I don't know. To answer your question, I don't know if there ever will be a sequel. Thank you.
How's it going, Jeremy?
Good, man.
My question for you is, what would you say you're most proud of in your life or acting career thus far?
It's a great question. What I'm most proud of him, it's like everything that you've done, everything that you do, you're a culmination of everything that's come before it. So for me, it's like, I remember someone posted something on Twitter today, like, not your finest moment, and it was this series that I did that was canceled like immediately back in the day. And without that show and that experience, I wouldn't be here, you know. And I just feel like we're at this place right now where everyone's kind of comparing and contrasting to each other. How many likes do you have? And all these things. And I just don't think it's very healthy, because none of us will be at the same place at the same time in our careers and our lives. And we should never compare ourselves to others, because it's just not healthy at all. So I try to embrace all of it. You know, I think this experience with Mr. Selfridge, you know, was incredible. And I really grew as an actor because of it. It's not as flashy a role as Ari Gold, and it's more nuanced. And as the seasons, you know, progress, the show gets better. And I just, you know, I think hopefully I got better at it. And you're just never too old to learn. I'm a student, you know, to this day, a very old student.
oh, stop. You're only as old as you feel.
Then I'm 14.
Exactly.
14 years old. But yeah, like Old School, speaking of Old School was a movie that, like, to give you an example of what an actor's life is like, I remember reading the script for Old School and just knowing this guy Todd Phillips wrote The Hangovers, and I was incredibly genius and prolific comedy guy. And I just remember thinking, this movie is so funny. It's gonna kill. How do I get in this movie? And by the time I got there, they're like, oh yeah, Vince Vaughn's playing that role. Or what about, no, that's gonna be Will Ferrell. Oh, that's every Wilson brother. that's ever been created will be playing those roles. And I'm like, is there anything left? Well, there's the villain. He's just the nerdy dean that they lock in a dumpster. And I was like, can I play that? And he was like, you can't play the nerd. And I was like, why not? He goes, come on, you look like Vince Vaughn's like brother. Like you know, you would be his abrasive buddy. You can't play a nerdy guy. I was like, why can't? I'm an actor. He goes, well, would you audition? I go, I'll come in tomorrow. I went out and found these like really big nerdy glasses and did a comb over and found like the worst sweater vest, you know, / Cosby sweater that I could ever find. That has a different connotation now, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does.
And then I basically roofied Todd Phillips, made sweet love to him, and got the
He
role.
went there. He just went there.
I got the role. Uh-oh. I didn't mean to go there. I went in and auditioned and got the role, you know, and had a great experience. And that's the thing. It's like part of being an actor, obviously, is to take on different roles and to not repeat yourself. And that's what it's all about. And it's up to you to do that and to find those opportunities and really get after it. And I think the Brits do that so beautifully. You always see them, you know, Tom Hardy just takes on a kind of, he's just completely different in every role that he does. And they really pride themselves on that. And I think that's really fun and really great.
And we have time for one more question, please.
Hi, Jeremy. So since you have a large theater background where you get a lot of rehearsal time with your castmates before the production goes up, I was wondering how your preparation differs with a television role like this, if it differs at all, and which preparation process you prefer.
You know, I prefer to have rehearsal just because you get to live with the character longer, and then by the time you do it, you've got to explore all these different options. And I mean, acting is a momentum sport, so you're trying to find that momentum. And it's your job, no matter what the circumstance is. Let's say like you're doing TV and there's no time for rehearsal. You've got to figure out a way to have momentum and to be in the best place possible given those circumstances, if that makes any sense. So how do you solve that problem? Even if it's taking someone, running the lines, running the scene, doing everything you can to simulate 3 weeks of rehearsal when you have one night. You know what I mean? And so you just, even if it's just like running it, so that by the time you get on set or on stage, you have that momentum going into it. Because there are no excuses. It's not like you don't get a mulligan, you don't get an asterisk next to it saying, I would have been better, like if you put underneath it, Jeremy Piven would have been better in this scene.
If he had an extra week.
If you hadn't, yeah, indeed. Given more time, the performance would have been more, like there is none of that. So it's really your job to figure out ways to, and there, you know, just little tricks like just to get more momentum. It's like that's your time as well. And so you've got to figure out a way to have a great communication with your director and the people that are there, and try to figure out ways to, you know, to get the best performance.
And tell us when we can see the 4th season.
March 27th on PBS.
Yes.
It airs, but you can also get the first 3 seasons on Amazon Prime and iTunes. And I think now is like the perfect time, like to start this show, because I think there are people that might say, well, you know, I haven't seen it, I don't want to start now. But it's like the way that people view shows, it's absolutely perfect. You binge watch the first 3 seasons. There's only 10 episodes per season. You watch the first 3 seasons, and then you start at season 4. It's kind of perfect.
And you can see him do his Don Corleone.
You can see Don Corleone.
Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.